So this is a video about sewing up and finishing your Picasso bug. So this one, admittedly, is very fiddly in the sewing up, which is why I'm going to do the full video to help you. But before you do any of that, you actually need to put the shell together. So just to talk through that, the shell is a very unusual shape. It's actually got square shoulders and then goes down to a tip. So before you put it together, just make sure you've lined up your sides. So it will have square on the top and a longer edge like that. Same thing on this side. So that's my square there. So what I'm going to do is actually put my tips together like that. So I've got my squares in position and then I'm going to double crochet all the way around the edge. So once you've got your blank canvas complete, it's time to start putting on the pieces. Now, it's a bit like a jigsaw puzzle, and some of you will find you're feeling more confident about this than others. So if you're feeling confident, there's no need to pin. My only advice would be to work from the front backwards as you put them in place. But if you want to make sure that it's absolutely perfect as you proceed, you could use blocking pins in order to get everything in the position that you want them to be before you carry on. Now, just to confuse you further, I've made this one using turquoise rather than sage. So I've actually swapped my turquoise out for sage so that you can see it in a different colorway like this. But if you were to start to mark them in place by blocking them out, what you would do to begin with would be to pin them in like this. So you could pin every single piece in place before you sew around the edge. Now, it is going to take a while. It's not going to be a fast project, this one, in terms of putting it together. Get ready psychologically that it will take you a while to put it together. The crochet has been nice and easy, but now it's time to really invest in that sewing up. Now, when you've got a piece like this, I wouldn't worry too much about the fact that you've got ends on either side. What I do to speed up sewing up when I've got something like this is I'll actually put the ends through together. Now, I'm using a skinny sewing up needle because I find that's going to be a little bit more accurate when I'm doing a lot of sewing like this. So I'm going to put my first piece in place, and all I'll do just to get these ends out of the way is I'll basically pull those two through like that. So they've gone. But then obviously that piece isn't secure like that. That's just to get those out of the way. Now I'll actually go back and I'll sew it in place with the other end. And to get the neatest effect, what I would recommend doing is back stitching. So you go in and then you come across by 2 stitches, back on yourself by a stitch, and then down and under again. Now, when it comes to a piece like this, before you finish it off, all that you need to do, you see how we've finished on a tall stitch, whereas we've got a nice curve at the other end, is all you need to do before you sew it in place is sew in through that stitch there like that, and then you'll get a nice mirrored curve on either ends in which to sew into position. And all I'm doing is I'm just going to tack it loosely into place first with that thread, and then I'll return and I'll sew it together carefully with the second one. So I've just tacked it into place like that. And then I'll come back and sew it into position. Same goes for this one. I'm going to tack this one in first. And with all the pieces again, I'm going to go sew through the first one before I sew it in. And I'm going for a policy here of just tacking them in. I'm going to come back and neaten them up later on. So I'm using one of the threads to tack them in place, just so that I can position all the pieces before I then come and sew in the ends neatly. Make sure I'm happy. So I'm relatively happy with those first few pieces. So now I'm just going to take the time to actually sew these ends in neatly. Now, when it comes to adding on these ones where you've got the orange, all you need to remember is that the orange is going to go basically on the bottom of both sides. So I've got everything else in place. It's now time to put these on the sides, and I'm just going to carry on like I have been. Just as a little tip, if you do find that you've not left yourself a long enough end, like I haven't actually left myself a long enough charcoal on that piece, all I would do is cut my ends relatively short and then almost curl them up underneath. So you don't need to sew in all these individual ends on a piece like this. I would sew on in charcoal here. So what I'm going to do, I'll neaten up my orange ones afterwards, but I've literally just kind of curved those other ones up beneath like that. Then I'm going to position it in there, and then I'm going to sew it in, leaving those ends underneath. So what I've done now is I've actually completed the whole of one side. And so now what I'm going to do is go back and make the other side as symmetrical as I can. Now, I say that because a big tip from me is try not to overthink this too much. It will be very, very hard to make it truly mirror symmetrical. So you're just going to have to go with it a little bit, be a bit more free and creative as you put those pieces in, and don't be too hard on yourself. So you might have noticed there, I actually waited to put this piece in last. That was just while I was putting all the other pieces in. I wanted to wait to get those in place before I put this piece in last of all. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew this zigzag in now, and then I'll carry on matching off the second side of my shell from the first. The only other thing I really want to show you is when it comes to sewing in the ends on your legs, Now, when you finish off these little black bits on the end of the feet, so in high contrast, should I say black? Charcoal, in high contrast to the primrose, in order to get a neat finish on those ends. So when you add those on, you'll have two ends like this. To get a nice neat finish, what you need to do is wrap around, so wrap around the bottom with your end like that, and then sew underneath them. So come through them like that, underneath the wraps that you've just done on the full length of the toe. And that way, when you snip that off, it'll be nice and tidy. So that's one done. On the second one, put that in and then wrap like that, and then sew underneath those wraps that you've just done, and then you can snip it off nice and close, and it will be nice and neat and tidy, and you won't end up with any of the ends in the wrong place. So I hope that video helps you just to see me doing it step by step like that and putting the shell together. My only last thing I can say really is it does take time. So just to give you an idea of the time that it's taken there, it's taken me a good hour to get to here. So I was going to say probably it would take me 2 hours, if not a bit longer, to actually sew this Picasso bug together. And obviously that's me not using pins and being quite confident with my placing. So make sure you're being realistic, make all your parts, then sit down and do it in one go would be my advice. It's well worth it. You'll be very satisfied at the end, but make sure you realise that actually you're going to spend as much time sewing as you are crocheting on this project.